Welcome back to the Raw Selection Private Equity Podcast. Today we have Ramanujam, Technology Transformation Operating Partners, discussing everything value creation, tech transformation, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity within the private equity sector. Ron, if you can share a brief insight into you, please.
Sure, Alex. By the way, delighted to be here. I'm impressed with the guests that you've had on the show, so happy to contribute to the conversation in our space, the private equity world. So my background really, I come from a pretty heavy tech background, cut my teeth in enterprise technology, in the banking, capital markets, wealth management world. So did kind of deployed large systems, primarily around data infrastructure, et cetera. Went on to work with a bunch of growth and early stage ventures. In fact, was a founding partner of a machine learning infrastructure platform. And then went on to BCG for a bunch of years, which were fantastic, where I really got to work with leading multinationals in finance and in CPG and healthcare. So I really got into other industries there. And I'm currently with a private equity firm. We're, focused very much on launching new businesses, interestingly, as well as the typical due diligence work that we do for acquisitions. And I also am on the board of a few early stage ventures, helping them launch and do a raise. And so that's sort of my busy schedule.
Busy guy. What's one mistake that you see either private equity firms or portfolio companies making, and what would you suggest to correct them?
Yeah, I think we should step back a bit. I mean, let's face it, right? We all know that the private equity world is changing really fast, and so relying solely on sort of financial engineering or going through the usual operating model sort of efficiencies and value drivers are probably beginning to get obsolete, right? I mean, at least in the industries that I'm involved in, which is financial services, high tech, healthcare. The window of opportunity is really really small, right? So any first mover advantage disappears fleetingly fast, and there's a whole range of fast followers that come in and probably do things better, right? So the idea that you've got time to wait for a year and figure out what you want to do after you made the acquisition, right, is long gone. And so the whole point is, how do you start that sort of very early stage analysis, assessment, putting in the action plan early on, from day one, of the whole period, right? So start that very early. The sooner you can start putting in the changes, understanding the situational sort of insights on the ground, the faster the faster you can sort of impact that J curve, right, to exit. So, and you give yourself a lot more room and more levers when you start early in the game. So things like starting to work on assessing the pricing models, the margins, so sort of those type of fundamentals of the business. But then starting to look at customer experience and onboarding, which is a this day and age table stakes, right? And that's how do you sort of supercharge those areas, and really where we're going now is, there's sort of the basics, like having proper data, data platforms and cloud infrastructures, uh, so that you can start future proofing yourself, right? So that you can start doing things like AI, much better predictive analytics for the future, et cetera. So those are all sort of in this day and age, I would say you're sort of, those are non-negotiable, right? To the point. Again, it depends on the type of business you're in, but for the most part, there are these sort of founding sort of principles that one can use, whether you're a global multinational or you're a mid-market company, right? You can vary those things, but there are certain 4 or 5 pillars, if you will, from a digital transformation perspective that every business ought to be looking at.
Perfect. And what's your take? So private equity's coined the term heavily value creation, and it's a popular term at the moment, which
Yeah.
in some extent, and I love this industry, and I think it's fascinating, and obviously serves a purpose within my life, of course. But the an overused term that's kind of hidden on from financial engineering. I remember a podcast that we did, I think with Matthew Garf, who referenced the McKinsey study that it was 50-60% of all portfolio companies grow on the basis of the market rather than actual any input from the private equity firm. So,
Yeah.
what's your kind of take on when it comes to value creation and the state of play from a private equity perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, it's not lack of intention or smarts, right? You've got the hungriest, smartest people in this industry. So it's clearly not the problem. I think the some of it's the cultural aspect. There's still a heavy lean into uh the financial side of it, because that's where the muscle is, right? And purely the financial side of it, or standard uh, value creation levers in operations, right? But I think that even that sort of takes longer into the whole period, and there are many things that could be done early on, and so things like are you really leveraging technology to the fullest, right? Have you started looking at, and by the way, this is something that should be looked at very early on, even in the pre-acquisition phase, right? What are infrastructure and technological IP that the acquisition brings to the table, right? Which gives it a premium, or is there tech debt there, which then helps you value the company differently, right? So I think that conversation is front and center from day one. That should be part of the DNA of any acquisition or any conversation. But then how do you start thinking about, putting it into action, right? And that's where a lot of the firms fail, right? I think there still tends to be a generalist approach to a lot of this. I think you could bring in, for example, sector-specific technology experts, right? People you've gotten to a point now where you're not only a domain expert in your field, but you're also a tech expert, right? So that sort of convergence starts becoming more and more important, because you can then accelerate that time to value, right? Versus trying to figure it out as you go, right? So it's much more deliberate, it's much more intentional, and an operator brings a set of playbooks and a whole lot of knowledge to the table that the GPs don't have to figure out, right? So it's a different equation when you bring in uh, expertise as well, and operators as well, and tech operators, I would add.
Absolutely. What's with regards to well, some of the things. So you mentioned about the 100-day action plan, and driving those successful outcomes. What are some of the things that you've learned from, prior processes that you've run that you've gone, yeah, we should have looked at this either earlier in due diligence, or equally, we should have taken action earlier within those 100 days?
Yeah, I think where a lot of, and this is not just private equity, right? This is global 1,000 companies grapple with the same issues, is sort of prioritizing what those high value target use cases are, right? What are we going after that is strategic, that is going to change the very trajectory of our future, that could be existential in some cases, right? We've seen trillion-dollar valuation companies suddenly become, a fraction of that. So the point is being very, very thoughtful and intentional about what those high impact use cases are, right? And then start developing your operating plan around those, achieving those milestones. So things like, we could do a lot. I keep bringing up the customer experience because that is front and center, and so there's so much that can be done from a tech perspective. And by the way, when I say operational changes, to me, ops and tech are two sides of the same coin. And so I don't differentiate the two. To enable and scale an operational initiative, you need the tech underneath it, right? So for me, they're both the same. And so the idea would be, how do we first, as a management team, decide on the top three or four most important target opportunities that we want to go after,
Mhm.
that have the highest revenue impact or cost savings or whatever it is, and then start thinking about them very, very individualistically in terms of what's the organizational governance and tech stack that sits underneath that, right? What do we need to put in place? What are the levers? And I keep using the word levers because it's a way for you to kind of modulate your whole strategy going forward, right? If you feel like you're not getting the benefits of certain things early on, you pivot and you make the change. But the sooner you put these tools in place, the more the better shot you have at really gaining some of those benefits. I mean, I go back to I'm a sports fan, and I go back to what you look at the greatest sort of dynasties, whether it's an individual athlete, the longest runs, or whether it's team, it's the ones that put systems in place, right? It's systems thinking. It's being able to put repeatable models in place. And that's where this whole notion of frameworks and playbooks come in, right? And so if you have a set of, a set of principles that you operate by, then and that just becomes part of the company's DNA, whether it's the portco or whether it's the actual P firm itself, you can create these repeatable models and just improve your success rates and your outcomes, right? So things like deploying, I mean, do you have a proper cloud infrastructure in place? Do you have, you know, not talking about data in terms of just getting real-time data on your company is just an absolute given. But are you at a point now where you can do things like predictive analytics, you know, and very personalized, hyper personalized customer experiences, and being able to drive financial gains from key operational changes using data, right? So having that level of insight into your business helps you really kind of navigate forward. And it's well known that the companies that come with pretty good or have built out their tech capabilities command premiums, right? Whether that's in a at exit, or whether you're looking for a roll up or what have you, right? I mean, any way you structure this, uh, tech spending is not a sunk cost, right? It's not an expense. It's a pure requirement. So, um, you know, uh, I mean, I can cite experiences having been there where 20%, 30% reduction in customer churn, right? 25, 30% cost savings in operations. I mean, these are, and when the minute you introduce AI into the mix, you now are talking about, it's an entirely different paradigm, right? I hate to kind of use that cliche, but you have now created a completely different sort of cost structure. It's a completely different profit profile. And now you've created potentially a new moat, right? That protects your business. So, AI has the potential to exponentially change the game if done right.
If you've been with us for a while, you'll know the name Brad Nathan, president of Lynx Equity Limited. He's been a guest on the podcast several times, sharing his insights into Lynx's unique approach to private market investments. For over 17 years, Lynx has focused on a buy and hold strategy, acquiring profitable businesses from retiring owners and building a global portfolio of over 60 private companies across North America, Europe, and the UK. Through private credit, Lynx offers investors the potential for fixed-rate interest income paid monthly. Interested in exploring this approach, if it fits your investment strategy, visit lynxequity.com/Alex. As with any investment, private market investments carry risks. We recommend you always consult your financial professional. So talk to us about AI. It's obviously, burst onto the scene in the last kind of 20, 24, 18 months or so. We've seen DeepSeek start to or threaten to disrupt, the commonly referred to as AI platform of ChatGPT. So what's your, give us an overview of AI and what products you should be using it for.
Yeah, I think the reality of it is almost all companies right now that are experimenting with AI are generally using Gen AI, right? So AI is a whole spectrum of different capabilities. There's, using foundational models. There's Gen AI. There's a whole new generation of agents coming on board, right? So agentic systems where you can use multiple agents that are working together to perform a set of tasks, right? So that's where this is all heading. And most companies are building capabilities around Gen AI, and so whether that's productivity tools, whether that's customer facing tools, whether that's, you know, back office automation, what have you. Right now, when you say AI, it's primarily Gen AI,
Mhm.
and so there's tremendous opportunity to gain pretty fast returns there. But the rub there is that you really need to put the guardrails in place before you can just let it rip, right? I mean, the challenge is you do want to increase innovation, you want to increase creativity, you want your employees bringing new ideas to the table. They're all using Chat GPT or Claude or whatever you have to do all kinds of really fantastic things, right? Which is increasing productivity. But you're also then injecting a whole range of new risks into the equation, right? Things like cyber risk, data, and we'll speak to some of that. Uh, and just things going off the rail, right? If you don't control this. So the goal is, how do you create the right framework, the right guardrails around AI without throttling it, right? And that's sort of the fine balance that you have to walk. And there's ways to do that, and being very, again, goes back to this sort of an operating model of AI, if you will, where you really start thinking about at the highest levels, what's the mission? What are the key sort of drivers? What do we want to achieve? Where do you want to take the company, et cetera? And looking at sort of the macro company wide level to then drilling down into key initiatives, right? Where can we, in fact, if we're saying, that we're having some severe, uh, I don't know, margin compression as an example, right? And as an acquisition, we thought we could actually acquire this company at a discount, and really get the synergies, improve margins, go after adjacencies, what have you, right? All the ways that you monetize an acquisition. Uh, you then start thinking about, okay, from a Gen AI perspective, right? How can I really leverage AI to change the equation here? But then also put in the guardrails, like there should be some sort of a standardized, uh, call it a center of excellence or some framework where you've got the right organizational structure, you've got the right governance structure, you've got the right security structure, and as long as you're within those guardrails, right, create a safe sandbox, if you will, for then everyone to play, and then that becomes a really good working model to experiment, to fail, to try out new things. And by the way, the experimental aspect of this is critical, and this is where companies, particularly PE firms, sort of back off of, because failure is not an option, right? That's the mantra. And AI, the whole point of it is to try and be bold, jump in. Uh, Sitting on the sidelines is not an option right now because you will quickly become obsolete. So, how do you stay within the game, make your mistakes, learn, and from those learnings, you might actually open up entirely new avenues of where you want to take the company, right? So, there's unintended consequences and happy surprises out of all of this, but experimenting is really important, but putting the right construct in place is equally important.
So private equity firms are starting to touch on this, and I think it's probably going to sit at the private equity level to begin to create playbooks around this. You've obviously got experience of developing things for different businesses, whether that be data generation and everything's applicable to each company, which makes it even more complex. It's a bit like, oh, every CRM, can go with every company. Well, that's not accurate. It needs to be built towards it. But from your perspective, what are some of the things that you say, do you know what? AI can do this. Every private equity firm should be thinking of creating a playbook that does this, that could be applied to each business. That could be, the simple of how to generate better financial reporting. I don't know. I don't know this obviously as well as you, but if there's any projects that you've worked on that you think this could be applied to every business, it just needs to be tailored and that could sit at private equity level. What do you think are some of those projects that should be worked on that could be deployed into the portfolio?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's where there seems to be a lot of uh, chatter and noise and sometimes hype and sometimes not being ambitious enough, right? So there's a mix of all of that emotion. I think it helps to think about it from the key pillars of your business perspective, right? And the ones that could change the direction of your business. Customer is one. So front and center of this, how do we improve customer experience? How do we improve customer, personalization? Whether that's better service models, better support models, knowing your customer better, right? All of that. So applying this to the customer is the one pillar. The second could be the product, right? And so that's your other key sort of as your reason for existence, right? What is your product or service? And is there a way for us to operationalize it and make it much more effective to kind of reduce your cost of goods sold, if you will, right? And to bump up your EBITDA margins, right? So that could be another key pillar, if you will. The third one could be your operations, right? And these are all directly applicable. There are thousands of use cases already in each of these domain areas. So there's plenty of inspiration to be had out there, right? So don't even go too far out on the limb. Take from learnings that are in the industry now and see how you can apply that to your particular business, right? So it's the industry's so young that there's tremendous opportunity to kind of create your own way, but it's really important to be in the game uh, and not try and figure it all out and not there is no such thing as, we've got all the answers. Now let's move forward, right? That whole mindset needs to be set aside and it's got to be, as I said, jump in and let's start experimenting. And we're gonna fail, and that's a given, but let's do it methodically, with intention, with the right systems in place, with the right people in place. And then I think your odds of having positive outcomes go way up, basically.
Thank you.
So really having that sort of, I would even say, what's the 100-day plan? And then what's the 6-month plan? What's the 12-month plan, right? Think about them as these sort of big milestones. And what do we want to achieve from a revenue perspective, an operational perspective, and a tech perspective, right? What are the tech sort of milestones to prop or deliver on those business milestones? So that's one way of thinking about it.
Not only am I the host of the Private Equity podcast, but I'm also the founder and managing partner of Raw Selection. Raw Selection is a private equity specialist executive search firm with two divisions, one that focuses on portfolio, C suite executive hires, and one that focuses on private equity direct hires of the back office and investment deal professionals to the industry. Alongside the podcast, we're passionate about giving back to the industry and giving people information that they can run and utilize. One thing we do regularly every year is we run salary reports on accurate and live data of people that we've interviewed and people that have shared their information with us. So if you're looking to compare your current compensation or your compensation for your next hire in your private equity firm or portfolio company, then please check out our YouTube channel and see the playlist of salary surveys. Cybersecurity continues to kind of threaten what we would all hope, especially in the lower middle market, just the big businesses. But as technology advances, obviously all these processes become a little bit more prominent with regards to threat levels. What's your take on cybersecurity and what's your concerns about it?
Yeah, that's another one of those non-negotiables that I don't think. I mean, let's face it, it's not sexy. No one wants to think about it, right? Including CEOs. I get it. Um, but even at the highest levels, it's our human nature that until we get hit, right, we don't really give it much thought. It's like an insurance policy. We don't want to think about dying, but we buy, life insurance, right? And I think it's a similar psychology to that at the organizational level. But I can tell you, being in sort of, I am part of the advisory team of a cybersecurity consulting firm, and I've been exposed to some of the newer generation of threats in the past year or two, which is just pretty mind blowing. I mean, these are new types of threat actors with way more sophisticated tools that are nation states. They are some of the best technologists you can imagine who are writing malware, right? Everything from things like this whole notion of internal dwellers, right, where they will inject your AI and then just sit there and just watch, and they can be there in your networks for years without you ever knowing about it. And there are cases of this that are happening. In fact, the whole CrowdStrike thing, which in itself was a pretty devastating attack, they didn't catch it because they did it through some, basically software manipulation. So the fact that there are these new threat actors. Now, again, it depends on your business, right? But if you're trying to protect your IP, your customer data, you want to protect yourself from just essentially ransomware. You do have to start thinking about this in the earliest stages of due diligence. That should be one of your criteria, and I wager that that is not a very heavily thought of topic right now, at least from my experience, right? And so that becomes, the typical model is, hey, yeah, we talked to the CISO, the chief information security officer, or we brought in someone and they gave us a bunch of check marks, right? Oh, by the way, our entire environment is in the cloud, so we rely on AWS for our security, et cetera, which may be fine for some businesses, but if you're a high-tech company or you're in sensitive industries, right? This is where the East is watching the West, right? Let's put it that way, and and cyber risk can become an existential threat for a company very quickly, right? If it's not managed. And by the way, there's this whole notion of this sort of like this what they call dormant liability is what you don't know is being calculated by your insurance provider. So it's also raising your insurance rates, right? So that's a OpEx that you could actually impact, you know. And so my point to all of this is there is a certain element of alarm here. I do want to kind of uh, set the expectation that this is an area that should not be minimized in any way. There's a whole idea of being able to bring in a certain level of vulnerability assessment. And by the way, these are not necessarily big lifts. You can do some pretty good stuff with, and you might want to bring in outside consultants to do this. But there's ways to protect yourself without over engineering the whole thing, right? And back to the same thing of balance. What is the right mix of solutions for you as a business that doesn't slow you down as well, right? So again, it's just threading that needle to make sure you've got the right solution in place.
Perfect. Gives us a really good insight into AI, technology, cybersecurity, value creation. So we've covered a lot there. What do you read? What do you watch? What do you listen to, Ron, that you recommend that others check out, please?
Yeah, am a I am a voracious reader, but I for the most part it's technical reading, business or technology. Uh, as a student of AI, I've been sort of fascinated with everything that's going on in AI, and interestingly enough, I'm fascinated by what's happening in the latest advances in human brain science and neuroscience, and it's extraordinary how we're learning more about the human brain than ever before. Our old definition of intelligence is changing. Our capacities are different. There's all kinds of research around Alzheimer's that's coming out now that is really fascinating of how the brain works. And so, interestingly enough, and just by sheer coincidence, I'm also reading some stuff around AI. And so, sort of that kind of juxtaposition between what we're learning about the human brain versus what we're doing on the compute side of artificial intelligence is really fascinating. So, a book that I'm reading right now, it's called Why Machines Learn. It's fascinating sort of story of how, you can take the most advanced language models and look at their lineage and it all goes back to high school math, right? And how high school math has come such a long way, but ultimately these are these are models that have been pumped up with a whole lot of CPUs and GPUs to make them much faster. And they are now living entities that are getting more and more and more intelligent. But ultimately, it's all living math. And it's really fascinating, the book, how it takes you through all the sort of the evolution of how mathematics has brought us here. So anyway, very, very geeky reading. Uh, but it's dense, but it's very rewarding. So that's what's keeping me busy these days.
Sounds good. I love you. Certainly admire your passion for AI, and you clearly enjoy it, and obviously have a great passion for it. Well, if anybody wishes to reach out to you, Ron, post this, and maybe wants to, as you would put it, geek out with regards to artificial intelligence, how best do they get in touch with you, please?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. So how do I give you or I'm at ron.raman, Raman at gmail.com, which is my personal email, which is probably the best way to reach me. I also have 4 other emails from the companies that I'm involved in, but I think Gmail is best or LinkedIn is fine as well.
Perfect. Talk about cybersecurity, and then you're handing out your email address on the internet. What's your date of birth, password, and your dog's favorite, or your mum's maiden name, or something? Well, look, thank you very much for coming on the podcast, Ron, sharing everything you have with regards to cybersecurity, value creation, technology transformation, and the big world that's happening and evolving within, not just private equity, but across every business, but certainly the focus here being on private equity. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me. It was a delight speaking with you.
And as always, to all our listeners, thank you very much for tuning in yet again to the Private Equity Podcast. Till the next time, keep smashing it, and thank you very much for tuning in.